Hi guys, it's Ms. Levy and I'm here to review the geography models for you as we prepare for the Human Geography exam on May 12th. Keeping in mind that you should have your packet available for you, available to you, and as I'm reviewing these models on the screen, you should be filling this information in on your packet. It's important that your information on the packet matches exactly what's on the screen. We're starting here with the demographic transition model. We're also going to discuss this concept of the S-curve and the J-curve. Here we have the model in the center. The model is 4 stages, and the demographic indicators that are represented on the model, we have the red. The red is the crude death rate. We have the blue is our crude birth rate. What we need to do is add our third main indicator here, which is our natural increase rate. So down here at the bottom with the legend, please add your NIR, your natural increase rate. Now let's put it on our model. We have our stage 1. In stage 1 we have a fluctuating crude birth rate and a fluctuating, both high and fluctuating crude birth rate, high and fluctuating crude death rate. What that leads to is down here at the bottom we have a low fluctuating natural increase rate, so stable growth down here, basically zero growth as we have war and peace, feast and famine. Then as we go to stage 2, the difference between stage 1 and stage 2 is this drop in crude death rate. You see this immediate drop in crude death rate. As that death rate drops, this natural increase rate explodes. It explodes. So please represent that on your model. It explodes. Now, once we get here to between 2 and 3, the difference between stages 2 and 3 is this immediate drop in crude birth rate. You see this immediate drop in crude birth rate. Once that crude birth rate drops, your natural increase rate must drop. So this difference between stage 2 and stage 3 should be a peak. It shouldn't be a hill. It should be a peak. That between 2, there's an immediate drop down to 3. And then this continues to drop through stage 3 here as our crude birth rate declines, and then we get over here to stage 4. And at stage 4 it continues to decrease, and depending upon what's happening here with your crude birth rate and crude death rate, you can see in this model, stage 4, the crude death rate is higher than the crude birth rate. That means your natural increase rate is going to meet down here at below 0 because our death rate is higher than our birth rate. We're losing more people than we're adding. If our crude birth rate and our crude death rate were exactly the same, then we would be here at 0. And if our crude birth rate was higher than our crude death rate, we would have very, very low growth, but still positive growth down here near 0. So over here on the left, we have what's represented as our J-curve. The J-curve represents growth, but exponential growth. You can see that this is represented with the letter J. The Malthus's theory is more applicable with the J-curve concept. The S-curve is more applicable here to our demographic transition model. You can see that this curve is in the shape of the letter S. This is representative of what's happening with our total population as we progress through the model. You can see that our total population, it is flat through stage 1. It increases substantially through stage 2. It's still increasing through stage 3. This is this idea of demographic momentum. It takes a long time for those changes to be felt. And then finally stabilizes here in stage 4. But you can see that as it's progressed through the model, there has been an increase in total population. That's represented here with our S-curve. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then the flat with the stage 4. So here let's go through the model. The purpose of the model is to explain the stages a country goes through as its population changes and it progresses in social, economic, and demographic development. When we look at countries, there are currently no countries in stage 1 of the demographic transition model. All countries have progressed at least to stage 2. When we look at the model, we just talked about that the crude birth rate is high and fluctuating, the crude death rate is high and fluctuating, and the natural increase rate is low and fluctuating. This leads to a very low population growth. When we look at our model, when we look at the population pyramid, we can see that we have a very large base, a small middle, and a tiny top. This is represented by an extreme triangular shape. You can see that we have very high birth rates down at the bottom. Birth rates are always represented at the bottom of the pyramids. Very high birth rates at the bottom. But you see we have very high death rates. You can see that we're losing a significant portion of the population every year who are dying off. And so we have our high birth, high death, very low life expectancy, extreme triangular shape. Now, what pushes a country from stage 1 to stage 2? It's two situations in history have done so. For our MDCs today, that was the Industrial Revolution. This would have been the countries that progressed from stage 1 to stage 2 from the 1750s into the 1930s. These countries are our MDCs, like Canada, the United States, Western Europe, and Australia. Our DCs and LDCs, they would have progressed from stage 1 to stage 2 very recently, from the 1950s and some just in the more recent times. They were pushed because of the medical revolution, improvements in and the accessibility of medical treatment, allowing them to live longer. Stage 2 countries, our examples are in Sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Cape Verde. Southeast Asia, we have Laos and Vietnam. South Asia, we have Bangladesh, and then we have the countries of Philippines, Afghanistan, and Haiti are all stage 2 countries. When we look at stage 2 countries, we know that the crude birth rate is very high. Our crude death rate is plummeting, leading to a high exploding natural increase rate. Our population growth rate is very high, and we can see this represented on our pyramid over here on the far right. Our pyramid, we have a fat bottom, a widening middle, and a skinny top. So our fat bottom, widening middle, and the skinny top. You can see that the bottom layers are the widest. Now, we can see it represented on our population pyramid as our crude birth rate is very, very high, our crude death rate plummets. You can see that represented over here because we start to see more straight edges on our sides. This represents that we have a high natural increase rate, but we have more people who are living. So whereas in population pyramid from stage 1, you could see that it was extreme as we had people who were dying. This one we have a much greater percentage of our population living. This is an exploding growth in their population. So what changes move countries from stage 2 to stage 3? Stage 3. We have to have changes in social customs and improved technology. You need education. You need greater wealth. But the true crucial component here from stage 2 to stage 3 is gender empowerment. You need access to birth control, access to education. You have to think to yourselves, what leads to lower birth rates? How can we control our birth rates, have less babies being born? Well, typically it's gender empowerment and it's access to birth control and education. That is what's keeping many countries in stage 2 is their status of women and their beliefs about status of women. Next, we have stage 3 countries. Examples are in East Asia, Latin America, Middle East. We have China, Brazil, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Chile. The shape of our population pyramid, we should start to see our shrinking bottom, a wider middle, and a slightly wider top. Why? Because you see a drop in our crude birth rate, which leads to that shrinking bottom, a falling but slower than before crude death rate, which is why you see the wider middle, and our natural increase rate slows. The wider top is an improving life expectancy. If you look to the right, you can see that represented here in our population pyramid. We see our shrinking bottom. This represents lower crude birth rates down here, increasing life expectancy, continued lower crude death rate as we go up our pyramid. So next is stage 4. What pushes countries from stage 3 to stage 4? This would be greater gender equity. More women are working. We have improved birth control, urbanization, and increasing wealth. When we look at stage 4, our examples of our countries would be in Western Europe, Japan, Russia, Canada. You see our shape of our pyramid. We're going to have a small bottom, a wider middle, and a even wider top. You'll see that the pyramid will be more rectangular or even inverted. Why? Because we have a very low crude birth rate, a very low crude death rate, and a very low natural increase rate. Our population growth is low. If you look over here at our population pyramid on the right, you can see that we have our inversion down at the bottom. This represents our very low crude birth rate. We have a very low death rate, you can see as we move up our pyramid, and we have high life expectancy up at the top. That's our explanation of the demographic transition model and how demographics, population affect a country's level of development. Next, let's talk about Rostow's economic stages of development. The author of this is Walt Rostow, and the purpose is to explain how a capitalist-based country can increase wealth and utilize the international market and global economy to progress from LDC to DC to from LDC to DC to MDC. Now, it's crucial to remember that Rostow's is a type of international trade approach model, which means that a country develops through engagement in the international markets in the global economy. So development comes from external, import, export, selling outside of the country. So this model has 5 stages, and it describes a country's progression, again, as they transform from LDC to MDC. Let's take a look at our stages. Stage 1 is traditional society. This is a country that has not yet begun the process of development. It contains a very high percentage of national wealth allocated to our military and religion. Rostow called these stages non-productive. There is no country in the world today that is in stage 1 traditional society. Stage 2 is our preconditions to take off. This is where development begins. Stage 2, this is when an elite group of people, or even the investment can come from outside of the country. They initiate innovative economic activities, including improvements in new technology and building of infrastructure. You need investment dollars in stage 2 to improve that technology and the infrastructure. So the key here is the investment dollars. The key to development is the building of infrastructure. So development begins in stage 2. Once we have that infrastructure in place, then a country can move on to stage 3, the takeoff. The takeoff, this is when you have rapid growth generated in a limited number of activities like textile and food production. The key element of stage 3, the takeoff, really is the country identifies its specialty, what it's going to specialize in, to utilize in the international market in order to gain profits, gain money. It has to be something that they have in abundance, like an abundance of a commodity, could be a mineral, could be a good they produce, perhaps it's an abundance of labor, and that the rest of the world wants and is willing to pay for. So they specialize, they identify that in the takeoff. They put all of their resources into building up that specialization in the takeoff, and they begin to improve their banking systems. In stage 4, the drive to maturity, this is when they take those profits from the takeoff and they begin to diversify. They build up new industries, they improve put more money into education, more money into social programs, and continue to build their banking systems. So they diversify, they diffuse those profits to other areas, and their workers become more skilled and specialized. Finally, we have the age of mass consumption. This is the pinnacle. This is when the economy shifts from heavy industry, so secondary, to consumer goods, to a tertiary-based economy. All sectors are fully operational, but the majority of jobs should be in the tertiary sector. This is where you should see highest levels of wealth, highest levels of GDP, highest levels of income. Now, there are many people who do support the Rostow's model as a blueprint for economic development. The support of the model, they say that because the developed countries of Western Europe and Anglo-America, they use this model first, and then other countries in Southern and Eastern Europe and Japan use this model successfully, that it is a blueprint that all countries should use. They also say that this is a relationship, a dynamic that does in fact exist throughout the world, that LDCs contain an abundant supply of raw materials and oftentimes labor sought by manufacturers and producers in MDCs, and that this can produce a relationship that's mutually beneficial. And that it is the best method for capitalist countries, given that the global economy and international trade are present, that this is current in the world today. There are many criticisms of this model. Let's take a look at these criticisms, 6 of them. They argued that economies would learn from one another and reduce the time taken to develop, which has not actually occurred, because they assumed that all countries would develop equally, but we know that culture and political systems do affect a country's economic systems. Doesn't consider a corrupt political system and the efficient use and need of this investment, the uneven resource development that is highly affected by the decline in global markets, that the prices of resources would rise and fall, and that this would be